The Starliner program has cost Boeing a staggering $5.8 billion, and this is more than SpaceX spent on its successful Crew Dragon program. Well, despite all of that money being spent, the first crewed test is not going so well. I told you before that Butch and Sunny, the two veteran astronauts that were sent up to the ISS in June, have been there for over 60 days. Originally, they were supposed to be there for 8 days, but now they might be there for 8 months. You better believe it. I couldn't believe my ears when I heard this during the NASA news conference on Wednesday. They received a lot of questions from the media, reporters like myself. Some answers were given, some answers were kind of given, and there was a lot of tap dancing in my opinion. Now, granted, some of these questions, they really might not have the answer to. They haven't made a final decision on whether or not they're going to have the crew return on Starliner or they're going to send them home on the Crew 9 return, which would be in February. That would also mean that 2 astronauts that were supposed to go up on the Crew 9 mission would not be able to go on the mission to leave room for Butch and Sunny. So there's a lot of ripple effects, a lot of complications with the decision on how to move forward, but NASA says that they haven't made that decision yet. When pressed about it, saying, well, knowing that the Crew 9 mission has slipped until September, you probably need to make the decision soon. So when are you going to have a decision? They said likely in mid-August. So in about a week from now. The story will continue. I will continue to cover it. And I will mention that Boeing and SpaceX were not a part of the conference. The more surprising one there is not hearing from Boeing, since a lot of these technical issues fall in their lap. We also haven't heard from Butch and Sunny in quite a while, and apparently once a decision is made, we will have a news briefing with them from up at the ISS, but it really would be nice to know their actual thoughts, which I'm sure we will never know. Here are just some highlights from the conversation, which was 90 minutes, so I tried to save some of your time.
We have tried to buy ourselves a little bit of time to work various options for return. And so recently this week at the Program Control Board, just yesterday, we approved moving the Crew 9 mission to no earlier than September 24th. We took that to the Program Control Board and it was approved, and we immediately put out a blog to make sure that everybody knew that we had made that decision. We appreciate your patience over the last few weeks. It took a little time to work with SpaceX on that movement of that flight, and also with the ISS program, because it's a very complicated manifest.
And here's another piece of information that I don't want to get buried. The Crew 9 mission is now expected to launch from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Station. This will be the first crewed launch from this complex, which SpaceX has built up in addition to its crew tower at Launch Complex 39A near KSC. They're doing this to avoid a conflict with 39A pad preparations for NASA's Europa Clipper mission, which is likely to launch in October from there on a Falcon Heavy rocket. But this will be the first crewed launch from Slick 40.
We've been working the certification of Pad 40 for a long time. We've always wanted to have a backup pad for these kinds of scenarios. And so that work has been underway for some time. And we think we can get that certification completed in time for a September 24th launch of Crew 9.
So NASA makes clear that they are still gathering data, doing tests, and doing analysis to understand the issues that Starliner had on the way to the International Space Station. In the meantime, and since they have more time because of the Crew 9 slip, NASA is exploring different contingency options. The main one being keeping Butch and Sunny on the ISS for another 6 months and bringing them home on a SpaceX Crew Dragon in 2025. And here are some of the other potential contingencies that they want to have ready and in place.
We've had a lot of discussion and questions about task orders recently, and I would say, we've done a lot of work in Commercial Crew to prepare for multiple contingency options. The first one is, and we want to be open and transparent about those options. The first one is to have an option in Dragon on the cargo pallet to fly 1 crew member, a total of 5 crew members down in a contingency only. And so we had a task order in place to go do that work, and that's out there. And so that work has been completed, and we now have modified the capability to not use a seat liner, but also use the phone. On Crew 9, we now have the capability to fly 2 crew members up and have ballast in the seats for that. and then return a total of 4 crew members with the right seats. We actually put out a task order with SpaceX to do that work, and that task order is out there in place, and SpaceX has completed an initial part of that work, and then there's a final part of the work to configure the vehicle for the 2-crew option and complete training for the crew for that option. And then finally, there's one more task order that we have worked on. In the event that we have to undock Starliner first in an uncrewed configuration, we have a task order in place to allow up to 3 crew members on the cargo pallet using a foam configuration in the Crew 8 Dragon. So we've done a lot of contingency work and a lot of contingency planning for a lot of scenarios, but we think now we would have the whole waterfront covered. As I said, we haven't really implemented planning for the mission for these things, but we have all these items in place to keep all the options on the table.
So how did it go from they were confident that they would be able to return home on Starliner and they just wanted to have more time in space to do tests on the ground and gather information? Well, NASA confirmed that it found excess heat around some of these Starliner thrusters, and this caused Teflon seals or poppets to bulge. That restricted the flow of propellant and triggered these thruster issues. But they're not sure whether the bulging seals are the root cause of the issue and how the problem could affect the Starliner return from space. This has caused major disagreements within NASA about how safe it is for Butch and Sunny to come home on Starliner, and hence that is why a decision hasn't been made.
I want to clarify a couple things relative to the uncrewed Starliner configuration relative to undock. That Starliner has the capability to undock in an uncrewed configuration. However, the mission data loads for this flight, the flight software we have on board today, are set up for a crewed undock. And what that means is, in close to station for docking and undocking, the failure response matrix in the software downloads to a crew manual capability for any breakouts. In order to do the uncrewed version, we'll have to go in and change these mission data loads and verify those through the Boeing Integrated Hardware Software Test Facility before we go fly that. There would be also additional training that the Boeing Flight Control Team would have to undergo, and some work to go lay out all that work. So the software on Dragon is fine, or on Starliner is fine. It can actually handle the capability to do an uncrewed undock. It's exactly what we did on OFT2. We just have to go configure some software parameters, not change the software to go do so.
Am I the only one that just heard a complete word salad? This is not just a small issue, and I feel that the problem is being minimized. This fix of the software, whether or not it's parameter load or an actual update to the software, which he says it's not, is going to take a minimum of 4 weeks. It really blows my mind that Starliner was able to do this in May of 2022, uncrewed and autonomously, and now they need a major several weeks long update to have that capability again. I'm not a software engineer, but something about this seems really strange and kind of like an oversight. It's amazing how many moving parts there are and how many ripple effects this whole situation has. Eric Berger was also on the call. He is the reason that I had some of this scoop 2 days ago, and he asked for some clarification. Here's his question.
Hi, thanks very much. I just want to echo what Jackie said about transparency. You know, Sox, back in your day, there were 2 briefings a day during shuttle missions oftentimes, and you know, it's been almost 2 weeks since we've heard about this stuff. Steve, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about the software configuration that needs to be changed on Starliner to undock autonomously. I've heard this is going to take several weeks to resolve, and so I'd just like to understand sort of why it might take that long if it's a simple change as you described. Also, can you or Sox give an estimate on the likelihood of Dragon versus Starliner return for Butch or Sunny? I know there's uncertainty, but is it like 50-50 at this point in your mind, or are you leaning one way or the other? Thank you.
I'll take the first question, and then we'll let Ken take the second question. So, yeah, we probably don't explain software very well, and I apologize for that. The software changes really are going back to what I would say would be the OFT2 configuration. And if you just think about the Starliner team, they have moved from May of 2022 into flying a crewed mission. They made a shift modified the software to have all the capabilities that the crew needs. Essentially, what we're asking them to do is go back 2 years in time and resurrect the software parameters that are required to be updated to give the automated responses to breakouts near the ISS should we have a problem in close to ISS, which now the software allows them to do manually. The team is always updating these mission data loads as the beta angle changes, as different things change, as landing site strategies change. They're always updating these parameters all the way through the flight. So what we really want them to do is, and as Dana mentioned, there's a slight change in the orientation of ISS at undock. So before we employ this methodology of undocking without a crew, we want to make sure we do all their work to make sure it's all tested and correct. We haven't done, I would say, any work since really May of 2022 when we had OFT2 on the uncrewed config. We've had the Boeing and NASA teams focus solely on working toward returning Starliner in a crewed configuration. Before we go execute that, it's just smart and responsible to go take the software and the mission data loads in this configuration, go into the integrated test facility. We call it ASIL, which is where all the flight software resides, all the flight hardware associated with the avionics resides, and then go run it through some test cases just to make sure we haven't missed anything. That's really what we would go do. That's really what would take the time if we were to pivot to an uncrewed undock. That's what we would go spend our time on. And I'll let Ken answer the second question.
Yeah, Eric, thanks for the thoughts on the press conferences. I appreciate that, and really appreciate your interest and how hard you're working to get accurate information out there to everybody. To give you a number, it's just really hard right now. I can't give you one. It could change drastically one way or another depending on new data. But I would say that our chances of an uncrewed Starliner return have increased a little bit based on where things have gone over the last week or two. And that's why we're looking more closely at that option to make sure that we can handle it. But again, new data coming in, new analysis, different discussion, we could find ourselves shifting another way.
Our next caller is Elizabeth Howell with Space.com. You may go ahead.
Thanks, everyone, for your time. This might be for Dana. Can you clarify, if possible, who would be flying on Crew 9 if it was only 2 astronauts? Would it be the pilot and the commander, for example? And I'm also wondering about the implications for future missions. If it was only 2 going up, would that affect the composition for Crew 10, for Crew 11, and the alliances with other space agencies such as Roscosmos? Thanks very much.
We're not ready to share specific crew names for the contingency plan. If we find ourselves in a position where we do make a decision that we're not going to fly Starliner back with Butch and Shunny, we'll share those details at that time.
Our next caller is Jackie Waddles with CNN. You may go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for hopping on. I think I speak for a lot of us when I say I hope that we can get more frequent updates like this. It's been a couple weeks now since we've had updates on Starliner, and also would really love to be able to hear from your Boeing counterparts in situations like this. So for my question, I just want to follow up on some reporting from my colleague Eric Berger. So it sounded like behind the scenes there was some pretty serious concern about if Starliner has certain thrusters fail during undocking, that it could pose a threat to the ISS or become uncontrolled. Can you tell us if that's true, if that's something that's really being discussed behind the scenes? And if so, how big are those concerns? How widespread are those concerns? Thanks so much.
So our strategy, we have fault tolerance for any number of things. So we've got sufficient fault tolerance for undocking. So we're not concerned about the, let's say immediate proximity around ISS. The other thing that we've done in the past with the vehicle, the attitude that we're in when Starliner undocks is I'll call it a passive release attitude. So even if, for example, the vehicle did nothing and just drifted out, it's on a safe trajectory for ISS. That's not the state the vehicle would be in, but that's an added, let's say, layer of conservatism that is already there. And so I'm not sure what the specific concern is that you're referring to, but there is plenty of fault tolerance. Plus, there is safe, complete drift out trajectory if none of the thrusters were working at all. So, Steve, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just say, from a thruster perspective, the biggest demand on the thrusters for the remaining portion of the flight is really the deorbit burn. There'll be a few thruster firings to back away from ISS, and then a burn to basically take it over the top of ISS, and then I would say below ISS, and then moves out in front of ISS. Those firings aren't that stressing on the thrusters. Where we get into the next part of the flight, and again, the heating is not nearly what we saw on the day of rendezvous, when the thrusters are firing very rapidly, not only to keep Starliner pointed toward the ISS, but also to fly it up the corridor and into the docking area. But the deorbit burn has a number of firings as the OMAC engines, the orbital maneuvering and thruster control engines, fire for the deorbit burn. 4 of those. The RCS thrusters will fire to hold the orientation of Starliner, to make sure it's pointed in the right direction to get all the thrust you need out of the engines. And that's the next stressing case. So it's really, the real concern is how many thrusters can we have fail off? We've done a lot of analysis that have shown that you can have significant number of the aft thrusters fail. In fact, you could have 4 failures of the aft thrusters, and we would still have great attitude control during the deorbit burn. And then after the deorbit burn, we need to maneuver to an attitude to separate the crew module and the service module. And then for that SEP sequence, the aft thrusters aren't required at all. Just want to clarify one other thing on the software. The software that's used, whether it be crewed or uncrewed, is the same software, the exact same flight software. What would need to be updated is a specific set of mission parameters, we call those mission data loads, to get into the uncrewed configuration. So the software doesn't have to be changed. The trajectory is the same. It really is on the software side, it's just some contingency mission data parameters in the software that if a crew weren't there, the software could then execute the checking and any response needed in close to ISS.
So, yeah, the story continues. I will continue your coverage on this, and hopefully we learn more in the next week or so. I think that without a doubt, they should send the crew home on a SpaceX Crew Dragon. I just don't think that this is a question. And, it's unfortunate with everything that has happened. I'm sure that if you work for Boeing and you're a part of this program, it's really not a great time. I wouldn't want to be Steve Stitch. He's getting a lot of, heat from the media, but a lot of the media were asking today, why are we not having more frequent updates? It seems that this would merit a lot more than just a couple weeks of an hour's worth of answers. So thank you so much for supporting my channel. I will continue to cover this for you. If you don't know me, I'm Ellie in Space. I used to work in TV news. I quit my day job to pursue my YouTube career as an independent space journalist, and I've been doing that now for over 2 years. So I appreciate everyone who is supporting the channel, as this is my full-time job. And again, thanks for watching this video. Give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.